Okay, the Special Education Alliance is excited to bring you our speaker tonight, Cindy Duch from the PEAL Center. Take it away, Cindy.
Okay, thanks, Rima.
Welcome.
This is really exciting. I am coming to you live from Pittsburgh. So I think that's so cool that, we can do that. Otherwise, Diane in our Philadelphia office would be with you, and she's right there in Philly. And some of you might have talked to her already. But PEAL Center is Pennsylvania's Parent Training and Information Center. We're federally funded to help families understand what their rights are, how to advocate for their child to feel empowered at their IEP meetings. We are entitled to be informed decision makers. And when there's information that we need as parents, schools have a lot of resources and parents don't really have a lot of resources. So PEAL is there to help families be their child's best advocate. Usually that means by sharing information about what the law says, best practice, strategizing for meetings, things you need to know to go in and feel good about participating in the meeting. If you guys are ready, I'm going to share my screen. And we are going to this isn't where I need to be right now. Let me just get situated here. All righty. It's still not going. Okay. This is all about IEPs today. And Sandy has forwarded me some of your questions, so hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those throughout the presentation. And let's get started. This is usually what we have up. The team's already done that for you. So here we have the mission of the PEAL Center. The mission of the PEAL Center is to educate and empower families to ensure that children, youth, and young adults with disabilities and special health care needs lead rich, active lives as full members of their schools and communities. The objectives for tonight's training are to describe IDEA and the educational rights the law mandates for all children, describe the IEP process, the team, and the document itself, discuss ways that families can provide meaningful input throughout the IEP process, and to answer questions related to the process after the presentation. So to get started, we talk about the key principles of IDEA. This is what sets the foundation for everything that our kids are entitled to. IDEA being the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This phrase that you see up on the screen now is really powerful and impactful. Disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of the individual to participate in or contribute to society. Anytime there's any kind of federal law or any kind of legislation that's passed now regarding disability, this phrase is in there just because of the power that's behind it and the message that it gives that this is life. According to IDEA, parents should be informed decision makers. So let's say you ask to observe the classroom that your child's in because you want to see what's going on in that classroom, and you need to see how they're reacting to things. And the school says, no, you can't do that. Well, that's kind of in violation of parents being informed decision makers. Teachers can see what the child's doing. They can bring that information to the team. We need to see it to be an informed decision maker at that team. Guarantees access to a free, appropriate public education for all children. And the law, when they write laws, they write them purposefully a little vague and not real specific, so that there is an understanding then of, well, what's it mean to be appropriate? And a couple times, the way that laws change, it has the appropriateness. You might have heard of the Andrew case, that was passed in, what was that now, 2017 maybe? But Andrew, spelled with an E, E-N-D-R-E-W, kind of raised the bar when it came to what was appropriate for our kids. So sometimes those things change. Children with disabilities should be educated with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate in the least restrictive environment. So you won't see the word inclusion or inclusive education in the law, but this is how it's referred to in the law when we talk about inclusive education. Somebody had asked the question or submitted the question, well, what's being done to educate classmates about kids with IEPs? When my son was in school, in elementary school, kindergarten through about 5th grade, I would ask the teacher ahead of time, the homeroom teacher, if I could go in during, I think it was, during like parent-teacher conferences when there was, parents were coming in and talk about autism and having Andrew included in the classroom and how much that meant to him and how much it also meant to their kids, what they could learn from him. So that was, something that I did, but recently, say about a year now, the legislation was passed to include disability curriculum in some schools. So there was a pilot, and the pilot named 10 schools throughout PA that are going to have some funds to be able to have this disability curriculum, not just like books about disability, but to include it in the actual curriculum, to include it in social studies, include it in science. And the nearest one that I could find in Montgomery County was North Penn. So North Penn is going to have that grant starting where they're going to embed disability curriculum within the curriculum that all kids are learning. The law talks, when we're talking about IDEA and about our kids being included, we talk about the support that they're going to get. And when they're included in their gen ed classes or in special ed classes, but especially for in general education classes, we talk about supplementary aids and services being available to the student. And these must be considered and provided so that the child can learn, so that it is appropriate. And so their participation in the gen ed classroom and in extracurricular activities. This isn't the only time you're going to hear me say extracurricular activities. And one way to do that, so PATN, the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, has kind of reworked what we used to call the Supplementary Aids and Services Toolkit to this framework for access and belonging. The framework is kind of a systematic way of the IEP team with the help of a trained facilitator. Now, right now, all those trained facilitators are from the intermediate units. So with the help of this trained facilitator, they're going to go through the framework and really think about what are the strengths of the child? What does the child bring or carry with them already? So what are their strengths? And then what are the needs? What do they need to be successful in a gen ed classroom? And it's just, like I said, it's through the toolkit that you really hone in on what's really important. What does the child need? And it's going to, for families who have trouble or their child having trouble in a gen ed classroom, this is what we use to say, yes, it can be done. How are we going to do it? And this helps the team answer that question. And, this all came about because of the Gaskin settlement agreement in 2005. And so we're really thankful for that. Shameless plug, the PEAL Center is hosting an inclusion event on November 30th in Harrisburg. And we're going to bring in some awesome speakers that include Michael McSheehan. If you haven't heard Michael, you've got to look him up because he's just awesome. And we're also having the Office of Special Education Programs. So that's the U.S. Department of Ed Office of Special Education Programs Director Valerie Williams come in and speak to us about inclusion. She didn't want to speak about, oh, what's the government doing to support us? She wanted to come and speak about her own experience in including her son with Down syndrome in class, in gen ed classes. So we're really excited about that. So let's get to the process, the meat of what we're talking about today. So the process starts with a referral, and that's, either by the parent or by the school. We do look for the school through Child Find in IDEA to identify, locate, and evaluate any student who may be in need of special education. So this is a responsibility, a big responsibility that they have. And this doesn't just include kids who are going to public school, it includes kids who are in private schools. So if a child's going to a parochial school or, a Montessori school, and it is the district's responsibility to locate those kids and evaluate them to see if they need special education services. Not every kid, but, a kid with a disability. We'll go through the evaluation process. Some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time really asked about evaluation. So there were a lot of questions about evaluation. So we'll take a little bit of time with that. And through the process, we'll also talk about the termination of eligibility. What if a student isn't found eligible for special education? What can we do then? IEP development. The very last part of this part of the process is placement. That comes after development of the IEP every time. IEP implementation, the annual review, and then reevaluation. So let's get started with the evaluation. A good IEP is going to start with a good evaluation. And the way that families can help with this is to ensure that the school has all the information they need about your child to select or choose the appropriate assessments and testing that they're going to do. So evaluation, you don't have to have a medical diagnosis for a child to be evaluated by the school. Only that you suspect a diagnosis or suspect a disability. So if your child's having trouble reading, nobody has to have a piece of paper from a doctor that says, oh yeah, they have dyslexia. You just have to, in starting with the evaluation process, suspect that they have that disability, share it with the school, and then they have to do testing based on suspected disability. So regarding evaluations themselves, they have to be multidisciplinary. This means that, we don't have one person running the whole evaluation show. There's going to be observations from the teachers. There's going to be testing and assessments that are done. Just a word about that. Usually what will happen regarding, let's say, assessments like an IQ test, that doesn't have to be delivered or proctored or done by the school psychologist. A lot of school psychologists have some interns who are studying to be school psychologists on staff as to help do this, and they can do that as part of the process. It's up to the school psychologist to interpret what the results of the assessment are, but to actually give the test, that's usually okay for an intern to do. So whatever concern, and this is the part where parents are so important, whatever concerns you have that you share with the school, and I'd always do that in writing. I like to say the first rule in advocacy is keep everything in writing. So whatever concerns you have or whatever suspected disability you think your child has, that's what's going to drive the kinds of assessments that they're going to do. There was another question that came in about, what kinds of assessments. So, for a child who's believed to have or has an autism diagnosis, we'd be looking for, something to measure their communication and language skills, probably something from a speech teacher, something to measure their social skills. that again, that could be the speech teacher that does that too, because they talk about language and social skills and behavior. We want to maybe do a functional behavior assessment that tells us what is the antecedent, what happens before a child has a certain behavior. And that's going to help us then figure out, well, how are we going to support this student with the behaviors that they're having in school? How are we going to change the environment so that we don't see the behavior? There's no reason for the child to have the behavior because his needs are being met. So those are examples of assessments that might be done. Typically, the school is always going to do an IQ test. If this is something you're vehemently against, that shouldn't be a problem. Just ask them not to do an IQ test. For some families, thinking about what does a teacher see when she sees an IQ number. I don't want my child, his curriculum to be based on whatever this number is, could be right or wrong. Andrew is on the autism spectrum. So that's a language-based disability. You're giving a language-based test. He's not going to score well. But does that tell what his actual intelligence is? If we presume competence? No, it doesn't. It's not going to help matters at all. So if you don't want a test done, you can indicate that too. So they have 60 days for the evaluation process. The reason that they have 60 days, and that's 60 calendar days, so weekends count towards the 60 days. Winter break, spring break, they all count towards the 60 days. Weekends, holidays count towards the 60 days. IDEA, the federal law for special education, says that schools have 60 days. Actually, Pennsylvania, in contrast to some other states, kind of gives us a break because they say that it's 60 calendar days, not 60 business days, not 60 school days. So it is actually 60 days, no questions asked, that's given. And again, that comes from the law. We can't, states can't provide, if a state were to decide that they wanted to do it in 40 days, they could, because of this, they would be offering more than the federal law offered, or better than the federal law offered. But Pennsylvania says 60 calendar days. So that's why it's 60 calendar days. The school will even tell you, oh, that's not enough time. They have all that stuff they're doing, but it is what it is. So
Cindy, we have a question a quick one on evaluations.
sure.
Can you share if there's an evaluation for a slow processor?
Well, again, so we're talking about suspected disability. I'm not a school psychologist, so I wouldn't be able to tell you if there was a specific test for that. But in, sharing with the team what your concerns are, the school psychologist should be able to identify what kind of test is going to identify that. And processing speed is something that's usually part of the, maybe part of the subtests that the schools will do as part of a larger test. So, that is a question that I would bring up to the school psychologist and ask them. It's a reasonable question, and one that they should, be able to share. And as, a parent who's entitled to be an informed decision maker, I would really encourage you to ask them that question. Good question. Evaluation process, that's where we get our evaluation report. They should hand that to you on the 60th day. And if they are short of, if they're not giving you the evaluation report in that 60-day timeline, you do have the right to file a state complaint because they're out of compliance with what the law says they're supposed to do. Anytime that the school is out of compliance, you have the right to file a state complaint. And usually what I've found is that if something's happening to you, it's likely happening to other students. And when you file a state complaint, it's supposed to help students who are similarly situated in that same, with that same problem. So it would help all students in the district if you were to file a complaint. And that would be, if the Office for or the Pennsylvania Department of Ed, through their investigation, would find, oh yes, this is happening, then part of the corrective action may be that they have to fix it for every student in the district. And importantly too, is that the evaluation report has to be given to the parent in the language that they use, their primary language or mode of communication. We're finding out that with a lot of families who don't use English as their primary language, this isn't always happening. So something that families do have to be aware of. So there has to be a variety of assessment tools to be used to gather functional, developmental, and academic information. And usually, let's say you just had a neuropsych done for your child by an outside provider, and now the school's saying, oh, we have to do our own, which is true. I mean, you can share that outside evaluation with them and they have to consider it. That's what the law says. They don't have to use it. They can't ignore it. They must consider it. But, there was a certain IQ test done that the school doesn't want to do again. So, because that's how they do some testing. Like I said, I'm not a psychologist. My thoughts are, oh, they think that the child's going to remember something. So, sorry, that's my phone. I'm working from home. So the variety of assessment tools has to be used to gather all this information. And again, you'll see this isn't just about academics. A lot of times families are told, oh, your child has great grades. You don't need, he doesn't need an IEP. But IEPs, or the need for special education, isn't only based on grades. Grades are highly subjective. Kids in elementary school get points for bringing in Kleenex boxes. So, you can't go by grades. And that's another thing is, you have to go by achievement. How well is the child doing compared to typical peers? And the only way you can do that, you can't make a decision about needing or not needing an IEP without doing an evaluation. That's not the way that IDEA is intended. And, if parents make the ask, the schools should be evaluating the student. Part of evaluation is always information from the family. Don't hold back here. Any information, anything that you're concerned about, be sure to include in any information you're sharing with the school. It's really important. You might think it's something that's benign or doesn't matter. If it's, that benign, then maybe don't include it, But even I would tell them, if something happened, let's say the dog died and Andrew was having a tough day, I'd let them know ahead of time that, the dog died. But during an evaluation, that might not be something that's all that important. But yeah, families include that information to tell the school. And, as far as kids who have behaviors, sometimes it's really helpful to share what motivates the child. What is an incentive that the child really likes to work for? What means something to the child? This isn't always something that they know. Like I said, a parent or the district can request an evaluation. If a district requests an evaluation and the parent does not consent or is not in agreement, the school can take the parent to due process. So that has to happen. Once the child's evaluated, if they're found eligible for special education, a parent can reject special education, no questions asked. What that means then is that they are not to hold the district liable for the child's free appropriate public education. But the school at that point can't pursue it. Case is closed, parent said no. Any kind of evaluations have to be administered without racial or cultural bias. I remember one example where it was a matching thing, and the kids were supposed to match a cup with a saucer. Well, I don't know about your house. We don't have any saucers. So, a lot of kids don't grow up with, needing a saucer under their cup. So that may be considered cultural bias. So if there's a question about it, there's usually a sample test that a parent could review beforehand, like they ask us to do with the PSSAs. There should be a sample test that you can review if you're concerned about racial or cultural biases. And the evaluations have to be administered in a form of communication or language, most likely to obtain a true picture of the child's abilities. Otherwise, we're just going to get poor information. So those things have to be in place. So let's talk about eligibility for IEP services once you get that report back. And like we said before, when if a student is found not eligible, there are kind of three things that can be done. At any time that a parent does not agree with the school, you may indicate that you disagree. And in a lot of cases, this is going to be appropriate. If the school says your child's not eligible for special education and you disagree, and then you want to go to due process, this is going to be important because you say, no, he does. And, then the hearing officer would know that. If you were to say you agree, even if you don't, the hearing officer will say, well, you said you agreed with this evaluation and with the determination of eligibility. So case closed, you agreed. If you don't agree with something you see, you have to sign papers like a notice of recommended educational placement. You have to sign it. But if you don't agree, sign that you disagree. So in this case, we're talking about if a child is eligible. So there are kind of, what we say is there's two prongs to a child being eligible for special education. One is that the student must meet one of 13 disability categories defined in IDEA. And two, that the student must need specially designed instruction to receive educational benefits. This means that the way that the instruction is delivered or the instruction itself is modified, different, or changed from what typical peers get. So that's the gist of specially designed instruction. Looks like there's a link here. I'll forward you guys the PowerPoint. Sandy, if it's okay, I'll forward that to you so you can share it with everybody. But there's guidance that the state puts out for information. So here's the disability categories we have: intellectual disability, hearing impairment, speech or language impairment, visual impairment, emotional disturbance. This has to be the one that they changed the wording next time. Orthopedic impairment, autism. Autism also includes Tourette syndrome, traumatic brain injury, other health impairment. This is kind of a catch-all. For a lot of students, this means ADD, ADHD. They all fit into this category. Specific learning disability. Now, if you look up, IDEA has information, helpful guidance regarding specific learning disability. They will indicate certain specific names of disabilities under SLD. One of those is dyslexia. Another is dysgraphia. All of these things are mentioned with guidance from IDEA. So if a school says, no, we don't use the term dyslexia, but what the feds have told us, so information and guidance from them says if dyslexia describes the needs of the student, then we do have to include that word in the IEP. Dysgraphia, that's, if dyslexia is about reading, dysgraphia is about math, numbers. Dysgraphia is about writing. Dyscalculia is about math. I got all these disses in my head. So excuse me, I hope that's clear. Dyslexia is about reading, dysgraphia is about writing, dyscalculia is about math. So all of these disabilities fall under specific learning disability. We also have deafness, deaf blindness, and multiple disability. So the child's going to fit in one of these categories. So what exactly is the IEP? In IDEA, it's called Individualized Education Program. It is the written statement that is created, reviewed, and revised in keeping with the law. It's both this whole process that we're talking about and the document itself. And it must be created and implemented in collaboration with families. I have a friend who calls herself the CEO of her IEP team, her son's IEP team. And she runs it that way, believe me. And the importance of families in general is really being brought out into the open with the current leadership that we have under the Office of Special Education Programs. They're talking a lot about families, including families, not only in this process, but in a lot of other processes that have to do with special education. It would be nice if it trickled down to, school programs, but sometimes that's why we're together, to power in numbers, to get the schools to include families. So those first 4 bullets on this slide are the mandated members of the IEP team. What the law says, the people that the law says must be included. So the parent must be included in an IEP team, a general education teacher, a special education teacher, and a local education agency representative. Local education agency refers to the school or charter school. And this person has to be able to make financial commitments for the school to the IEP team. So you need to have someone at that table that can say, oh, yes, we are going to buy an FM system for that student. We can do that. Oh, yes, we can get an aid for the student in that classroom. There shouldn't be a question at the IEP meeting about, oh, let me see, let me go back to that person. Let me find out from the special ed director. Because a lot of times principals are given the authority to be an LEA. If the person has to go back and ask somebody else if that's okay, they're not an LEA, and they would be out of compliance with what the law says. So that person has to be able to commit financial resources right there at the meeting. If needed, you can have a person who can interpret evaluation results. Usually this is the school psychologist. And I'd feel free to reach out to that person anytime you have any questions about the evaluation. There's so much in that evaluation that, before I wouldn't commit to answering a question about, a specific test, because I don't know. And none of us are expected to know those things. That's why if we have a question about it, there are experts at the school that we should be able to ask questions of. Others with knowledge or expertise. This means somebody that you feel has knowledge or expertise. You can bring anybody you want. You're the one that determines knowledge or expertise as a parent. As a parent, if there's a specific teacher you want to come to the meeting, again, I would put that in writing and ask the team to bring that person to the meeting. A lot of times there's a teacher, we might be having an end of the year meeting, and there might be a teacher who's just really great with our child. And we're like, oh, I wish she could share her information and her knowledge with the team coming up. ask that person to the meeting, make that request that that person be invited to the meeting. They have lots of information, knowledge, and expertise about your child. Student, when appropriate. At age 14, students must be invited to meetings. Andrew started coming to his IEP meetings when he was in 5th grade. He only participated then about 15 minutes. We would prepare ahead of time. We would have index cards. One index card would say strengths, what he felt he was good at. Another one would say needs, what do you think you need when you're in the classroom? And then another one for goals. And he would, when he was in 5th grade, stay in for just a short amount of time, getting exposed to, the fact that this meeting was all about him, and getting exposed to speaking in a group with a bunch of adults. But they really paid attention to him. In 6th grade, he wanted to learn how to talk to girls. Now, I could have come in and said, Andrew wants to learn to talk to girls. And the team could have said, oh, well, okay, well, yeah, all kids that age do. But when it came from him, when he said, this is my goal, they really took it to heart. And they put a goal in there just how he wanted it, that he wanted to learn how to talk to girls. So it really meant something coming from him. And in turn, then, that made him feel empowered that they listened to him. So it can happen at any time. And participation of either the regular ed teacher or special education teacher can be waived only if the parent agrees. So let's say you're really counting on the occupational therapist to be at this meeting, and they say, I can't make it. Only if you agree in writing, they'll give you a paper to sign. Can they be waived, and they have to submit a report. So they have to submit in writing what they would have said had they been able to attend. You don't have to agree, though. If this person, that, let's say the issues that your child is having in school right now really have to do with this individual and the service they provide, then you can say, you know what, we can't have this meeting without this person here. Let's just schedule for another time. So that's up to you. So there's really two big purposes to having the IEP. To identify those measurable goals for your child, and to clearly identify all of the services, supplementary aids and services that the school district will provide for your child, to have it in writing. But as we know, this is a fluid document, can change any time. So keep those things in mind. So we have to consider how the child accesses or will access the gen ed curriculum. And this is even if they're in a special education class the whole entire day, they should still have access to the general education curriculum. All it means is that specially designed instruction will be put into place so that the child can have access to the gen ed curriculum. So what that means is, let's say that, we're in 5th grade and the science class is learning parts of a cell. And in the general education classroom, the kids are going to learn 20 parts of the cell and be able to identify them. So if our child's in, let's say, a pull-out science class, and we want them to have access to the general education, they're going to have access to this curriculum. But maybe because of his unique needs, we're going to say he only has to identify 5 parts of the cell. So that's access to the gen ed curriculum. He's still learning what other kids are learning. It just looks different for him as an individual based on his unique circumstances. Extracurricular activities. This is huge. Andrew was in the marching band. The best part of high school was the marching band for him. But you know what? He needed support there. He needed to have a one-on-one aide. He still, had trouble navigating, staying where he was supposed to stay. So that person made sure that happened. But, the band, they also go to away games. So that person had to support him at away games. The band also has band trips where they go to Kentucky, Virginia, Florida. The one-on-one aide went with him to those trips because he needed support there. The reason that we were, usually what we say is that extracurricular activities are something that is school sponsored. Well, in our school district, the school board has to approve these trips. So using that to say it's school sponsored, actually it was a mom that came before me whose child had needs where he needed to be supported on any of these trips. She fought tooth and nail to have her son supported on these band trips. Band trips are important. In our school, 10% of the kids at the high school are in the marching band. So it's big. And it's really important that kids are part of all their extracurricular activities. When you think of when you were in school, and you don't think about, oh, that cool Pythagorean theorem that you learned. No, you think about going to football games and playing after school sports and cheerleading. You think of the things you were involved in with friends. Our kids do the same. They want to do those extracurricular activities. And they should also get support in non-academic school-related activities. This would include field trips. Whatever support the student needs to be able to attend, a parent shouldn't have to go. It means a child gets support at a non-academic school activity. Could be a school assembly, but this is what they're entitled to. Here's a link for procedural safeguards. We have a whole different training on just procedural safeguards. And these are where your rights are described. You might get that from the school and say, oh, this paper again. But if you've never taken a look at it or read through it, and it's easier to read now, they don't use so much legal language and they do have an index. Take a look at it and see, what you might be missing or what you didn't know. Then call up the PEAL Center and we'll delve a little more deeply into what you need to know regarding your procedural safeguards. So sections of the document. In summary here, the demographics and team meeting information, that's what you start out with. Special considerations, you'll see that list that has the boxes. Check yes or no if the child has any of the special considerations. Present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. This is also where you find parent concerns on the IEP is in this part. And don't hold back. Whatever concerns you have about your child, put them here. Transition services, if your child is age 14 or the year they turn 14. Participation in state and local assessments, goals and objectives. Special education related services, supplementary aid services and program modifications, educational placement, specific to what program are they going to be supported by, what school are they going to be in, and then Penn data reporting, what percentage of school is going to be special education only, and what percent are they going to be in general education with students without disabilities. So we look at the present ed levels. This is information that's brought over from the evaluation report and included in summary in the IEP itself. And I know a lot of times you'll see grades and that's fine, but that's not really telling us specifically where is this individual student and how are they performing regarding their achievement compared to other students. And then that describes what needs that they have. And then from those needs, we'll talk about the goals. And it's important to talk about strengths. That's things that, we don't necessarily have to teach the child. They have in their toolbox, they can use it. And this is where parent concerns come in. Information gathered from families about their concerns and their child's strengths. I get a lot of calls from families that sometimes a school won't include information from an outside report, a report they've had done on their own, in the IEP, or, it's information that's really important that needs to be part of the IEP. If the school is only considering that report, doesn't want to include any part of it, if there's parts of that report, or even the entire report, that you want included in that document, put it under parent concerns. There's no reason any part of that should be censored. Don't swear, but be sure to get that information in the IEP. If you feel it's important enough as the parent that it should be documented, use the parent concerns part of the IEP. And the information here that we've gotten from the evaluation report is going to be baseline data. Where's the child right now at this point in time? So when we write goals, we're going to want to know where are they starting, and that's your baseline data. If a need is addressed in the evaluation report, it has to be addressed in the IEP. That's why we have the evaluation report. It tells us, what does this child need to be successful? What are their foundational needs? So, if you think of, in IEPs, you don't see goals around social science or science, because we're looking at what the foundational needs of the student are. That's why a lot of times they're around reading and writing and math, is because they use those things in other classes. And those are the foundational skills that they need to build. We're going to bring it up again. Repetition makes you remember. So you know your child the best. You know those things that motivate them. Provide this information to team members and what you need to do about how your child functions across settings. What does the team need to know? There is, if you go to pacer.org, PACER, and in the search, you put in student snapshot. I don't know if this slideshow shows more information about the student snapshot, but somebody asked, how do we prepare for an IEP meeting? So take a look at that student snapshot and think about, what interests your child? What kind of toys do they play with at home? What kind of books do they like to look at? What kind of books do they like to read? These are the kind of things that would help the team think about what would motivate your child. What would your child want to work towards? Should there be question about those kind of things? Write your concerns in there. And, when you want to, somebody asked how to prep for an IEP meeting. Write things down ahead of time. It is an emotional meeting. Even if you are an advocate or you work as an advocate, you go into those meetings and you're not an advocate in those meetings, you're somebody's mom. And the emotion that is in that, you can't do away with that emotion. So prepare yourself by writing ahead of time what you need to talk about. And you are CEO of that team, so the team should be ready and willing to talk about what you need to discuss in that meeting. Now, when we think about developing the IEP, you might think about, well, what all needs to go in there? What's important? So we're going to look at that evaluation. If you need help going over an evaluation, go over it with a friend, call the PEAL Center, we'll go over it with you. You'll go over it with the school, but if there are certain things that pop out as you're reviewing it with someone else, that might be things you want to bring up at the meeting. When you think about what the goals are, does the child have any needs related to traveling to school? They okay on the bus? They need some support on the bus? How about before school starts? Do they have trouble getting into the building? Do they have trouble starting out in the morning? Maybe there's something we need to do regarding the functional behavior assessment or a behavior plan because a child has school avoidance. They don't want to go to school. They're hesitant to go to school. This is a behavior that's impeding their learning. So this is something that the school can address. Needs in academic classes, whether they're behavior or academic. Related services. Related services are services that are provided so that a child can access their free appropriate public education. We'll go over those again, but typically that's something like OT, PT, speech. Do they have any needs at lunch and recess? How about traveling throughout the building? I remember one story where a student was always late to her classes, and they couldn't figure out, her team couldn't figure out, why is she always late to her classes? Well, it turns out that, her homeroom was her home base. And when she got to the point where she was in middle school and having to change rooms, she would always go from her classroom back to the homeroom and then navigate from there how to get to the next class. So her team was able to figure out she needs help navigating the building. Homework organization. This one's huge. I hear from so many families, especially, kids with ADHD. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. You think of, kids who are preparing, we go to school to prepare to work in the adult world, navigate, stores and things like that. And so knowing these things and being able to organize, that's a huge part of being successful and, honing those skills. Again, extracurricular activities. I told you guys we were going to talk about this more than a couple of times. It's really important. And then traveling home. What needs might they have in traveling home? Transition. Big win for families and for kids this year when, because of a lawsuit that was brought, I can't remember the district. It's out in the eastern part of the state. There was discussion, and there's discussion in other states too, about what IDEA, what IDEA's intent was in providing transition services. So IDEA says age 21. But what folks were starting to say was, well, that's 21 inclusive of their entire 21st year of school or of age. So instead of having to go through a lawsuit, the state said, we're just going to settle this, and the students, all transition age students, get services up until their 22nd birthday. So yes, that could mean the middle of the school year, but when you're talking about transition services and a child who is that age, it shouldn't matter if it's the middle of the school year, near the beginning of the school year, or the end of the school year. The day after the bus doesn't come anymore should look the same as the last day of school. So that's what we're preparing for. So there's 3 areas that teams look at when they look at transition services: post-secondary education and training, employment, and community participation. So what are we going to look at, and how is that going to look on the IEP? So we start with outcomes. Now you'll see on an IEP document, it says goals. That makes things really confusing because we already have goals in an IEP. So we refer to it as outcomes. What do we want the child to do when they leave school? What's their education going to look like? What's their employment going to look like? What's their community participation going to look like? What are we preparing for? The other part of the IEP is the activities. What activities are going to be done by the school to ensure that the child reaches those goals in those 3 areas? And finally, what IEP goals are going to support the child in meeting those goals of transition? So these are some, Act 26 ensures that kids have summer employment, helps students get summer employment, because what we know is that students who have summer employment are more likely to have jobs when they leave school. So this is huge. And there is a dovetail here in transition between the Pennsylvania Department of Ed and the Office of Vocational Rehab, OVR. What we look for is those two to work together in supporting the student so that they do leave school successful in securing post-secondary education or employment and independent living. So these questions were asked of the IEP team The state has to report that, or the LEA has to provide that information to the state. Does the student have a transition plan as part of the IEP? Does the student have an outcome goal of competitive integrated employment, meaning it's not supported employment, but it is competitive, they're paid a competitive wage, they're integrated, it's with typical peers, with typically developing folks, just folks that work there already. Did the student participate in competitive integrated work experience? And did the student participate in individual job coaching services funded by the school in a paid work experience? This is the responsibility of the school when the student turns 14. This used to be the part that scared me the most. But then when you find out more about goals, about writing goals, about progress monitoring, it kind of became a big interest, because when I review IEPs, about 95% of the time, there's parts of this measurable annual goals that's missing. This is what we've gotten from PATN, Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, as far as goals, writing goals. They have to be specific, observable, and measurable. So if your goal says that you're going to understand a story, or that your child's going to understand, or he's going to increase his math skills, you can't see understand. You can't see increase in and of itself. So they have to be specific, something you can see happening, and they have to be measurable. If it's not those things, then they have to be written so that they are. They have to relate directly to the areas of concern. For those, we go back to the evaluation report. And they have to describe. Now, this all has to be part of the goal and written in there. Patton calls it the performance criteria. So it's what the student will be able to do, what it will look like. So sometimes you'll be given 4 short stories. Nathan will be able to, so the name has to be there, what it's going to look like. So given this, 4 stories, 4 short stories, and what the child will be able to do. This measurement part is so important. We want to know, how's it going to be measured? What's going to make us see that the student has mastered the goal? And so we want to, sorry, that's the dog. So again, we want to start with that baseline that we got in the evaluation report. Where is the student right now? And then the school, with their educational expertise, is going to help us figure out, where can we expect the student to be at the end of 1 year? Measurable annual goals. So what we have to know when they're measuring it is, how is that going to be measured? And not only that, but we have to be able to tell through progress monitoring, how well is the student doing? So what we have to know is, let's say the teacher gives the student an intervention, helps them with math. Then we have to take a probe. How good is that intervention working? That's why we say, how frequently? How frequently is the teacher going to probe the student on this specific goal to see if they're making progress? Is the intervention that they're providing working? This is probably especially true of reading, because there's so many different reading programs and so many different needs of students regarding reading, that, you might have a reading program, Read Naturally. It's a pretty basic program. Lots of schools use it. But, is it going to help a student with dyslexia make progress in reading? Probably not. It's not exactly a multi-sensory reading program that students with dyslexia typically need to make progress in reading. So the school's going to have to provide the intervention, so either Read Naturally, and then take a probe to see, how well is the student meeting their goal? What's their goal at this point in time? And then they do that through the whole 9 weeks. I say 9 weeks because that's typically schools will break down their whole entire year into 4 different segments where they report information to the family. You get report cards every 9 weeks. You're going to get progress reports every 9 weeks. Whenever report cards come out, that's when you get a progress report on how your student's doing specific to IEP goals. If you don't understand how he's making progress, what you can do is, with all this data they have, they could easily make a graph to show you, oh, look, your child has an upward trending line, they're doing great. Or, oh my gosh, they've maintained the work that they're doing, but they haven't made any progress. That's the kind of info we need. It's not enough to say in a progress report, child's making progress, because that's going to mean different things to different people. So we want real facts about how the progress looks for our individual student. And again, this is something, if you want to go over this one-on-one, this publication that Patton has about writing effective goals will tell you about each of these performance criteria and what has to be included in a goal to ensure that everyone's on the same page and we're going to get good progress monitoring. Individualized service and support. So this is kind of the gist of inclusive education, making sure our child gets what they need so that they are successful especially in their gen ed classes, because this is where they need the support, but in the whole day. Especially special education services, including the use of specially designed instruction. So that makes sure that it meets the needs of the child in all areas, academic, functional, behavior, and supports skills needed to transition to secondary education and adult. So if a child with autism has visual supports to help him understand what his academic schedule is during the day. He also has some alternate ways to communicate. Maybe it's a child with, who has difficulty with language. So they need alternate modes of communication. For some students with autism, something like social stories makes things easier for them to understand. A lot of students with autism need have sensory needs that need to be met during the day. And then planned opportunities for social engagement. My son's school, they always used to say, oh, we can't force friendship. I'm not asking you to force friendship. I'm asking you to make those opportunities available so that that's something that he can work on, or that if he has a goal for increasing social skills, that it's something that can be worked on with the help of a facilitator. Now, accommodations and modifications allow the child to access both their educational and non-academic school-related activities. So an accommodation is something that's going to be provided. It could be provided to, one of the things that we talk about, if a child's not eligible for special education, but they have a disability, they may be eligible for a 504 plan. What the 504 does is give students only accommodations. So maybe a student needs to be seated at the front of the class to reduce distractions. Maybe the student has trouble with fine motor, so they need a grip on their pencil. Accommodations are provided so that the school can have equal access to their education as anyone else. Modifications are these changes that are sometimes made so that, again, the curriculum is accessible to our child. Modifications might change the way the instruction is delivered, or might change the information that the student's receiving compared to other students. So that's why the modifications, they can't be provided through a 504. If there's a need for modifications, that's specifically special education. It's changing the way that the information is delivered to the child. So again, here's some, examples of some supplementary aids and services. Maybe the child uses augmentative communication and needs a larger desk to hold their device. Maybe they need more time on a test and that it's provided in alternate formats. Extended time on a test, that would be an accommodation. Something that a student with a 504 or an IEP could use. A peer-cited guide for low vision student to attend marching band activities. So, there's a lot of publications on supplementary aids and services, and those, to ensure that kids are in their least restrictive environment. This slide specific to augmentative and alternate communication. We talk, a lot of talk now is around presuming competence. And presuming competence doesn't mean that, the students are all going to perform at grade level. That's not what it means. We are presuming that all kids can learn. And when we presume competence, one of the biggest challenges to inclusive education or for a student being able to learn is communication. So all kids have to have a way to communicate. And this also, it reduces behavior. There's lots of behaviors that occur when a child becomes frustrated or they can't explain what their wants or needs are. All students need communication. They need a way to communicate. It doesn't always have to be, some kind of device. It could be ASL, a way to learn to communicate that works for the family, the student. Related services. I think we, talked a little bit before about related services. And these are what kids need to access their free appropriate public education. We typically think of speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy. What a lot of families don't access for their child, especially in these trying times when we've recognized, and it's even recognized at a national level, that there's so much need for mental health support in schools, is psychological counseling as a related service. And this is specific to the needs of the child. So again, an evaluation is done specific to psychological counseling to determine what are the needs of the child. A child who might have, want to check in with a guidance counselor once a week, and that's the support that the child needs. And that could be made available, but some kids might need a little more intense or more specialized psychological counseling. So, through evaluation, we can find, does the child need psychological counseling from a certified therapist, from a, licensed psychologist? Whatever level of psychological counseling a student needs should be provided by the school. His disability doesn't go away just because he walks in the school building. So if that's something that he needs to be successful during the day, the school has to provide it. So know that that's available too. And then there's other things that we have listed here: orientation and mobility, traveling throughout, usually this is given to students who have vision impairments, but, kids who are of transition age might also need to know, how do you take a bus? How do you navigate walking from, crossing a street, or, things like that. So that can also be mobility services, travel training. So there's a variety, and it depends on the needs of the student. Supports for school personnel. I love this one. I suggest this one to families all the time. Let's say, a child is starting school and they have epilepsy. And this is kind of a low incident disability, something that certain teachers might not see all the time, paraprofessional might not be familiar with it. The whole idea of supports for school personnel is that it supports teachers and staff to help the child achieve goals in the gen ed classroom. So let's say a student who has epilepsy and the teacher's not familiar with it, not sure what to expect, and needs some information about epilepsy specifically. Well, in Western PA, we have Epilepsy Foundation. They provide training to schools. So we might say in the supports for school personnel that the school district will provide epilepsy training from the Epilepsy Foundation for staff on a day for professional development. And then they would set that up, make sure that that happens. Sometimes there's books that we read as families and know that that was really helpful and that it would really help our teachers or our paraprofessionals help the student. That's something that can be put in supports for school personnel. Conferences that you might be aware of can be put here too. If there's something that you need, let's say your child's starting to use augmentative communication and you need to know how to learn to use it, that you're going to want to put in the specially designed instruction. You are entitled to learn how to use that to help your child. Training on the use of positive behavioral supports. We know this is a big one. And sometimes, a para might not be aware of how to help a student. So again, training might be available and might be needed. Peer-mediated strategies, use of specialized adaptations to the classroom. The list goes on when it comes to supporting school personnel. It could be somewhere to be creative. When we get to placement, and we want to ensure that kids are in their least restrictive environment, then these 4 questions, they came out of the Gaskin settlement. Again, that was from 2005, to ensure that the team is really taking a look at and really considering that the child is in their least restrictive environment. If you'll notice on the notice of recommended educational placement, there's a box that says options considered. Right above that box, it tells us that every team has to first consider the gen ed classroom with all needed supports and services. You don't start with, they need to be in life skills classroom. The team starts with the gen ed classroom with all needed supports and services. So these questions are going to help identify, is the team considering everything they need to consider regarding that? And the questions don't have to have written answers to them, but it's to remind the team to consider these 4 questions. The annotated IEP, I can't say enough about that document and how helpful it is. If you bring a copy to an IEP meeting and there's question of what goes in a certain part of the IEP, it's a fantastic document where notes are provided on each part of the IEP to help the team figure out or know what goes in each part of the IEP. And it has some great information in it too. The 4 questions also ensure, like I said, that, before we think about removing the student from the classroom for any amount of time, are all of these supports and special designed instruction considered? And when we talk about accessing the general education curriculum, again, we're not talking about grade level, and we're not talking about whether the child will have access to the gen ed curriculum. All kids should have access to the gen ed curriculum, but we're talking about how is the child going to have access to the gen ed curriculum. And I think that how question during an IEP meeting is really helpful. If you're, at an IEP meeting and you're asking, why are you doing this? Or when are you doing that? It might lead to the school or another individual to be defensive. But if you ask them, well, how are we going to include my child? How are we going to provide this kind of support that he needs? It really opens up more conversation. So I like remembering to, trying to remind myself during a meeting, use those how questions to generate conversation. I know there was other stuff I wanted to talk about, and you guys gave me till 9 o'clock. So I wanted to make sure to get to each of these questions that were asked, and we did get through some of them. But one question that we got, and it was really important and really does talk to inclusive education, is the parent said that their child was doing poorly in a class, and that the child does assignments and appears to be ready, but he's still failing the class. What can be done? And so, we did talk about that framework for access and belonging. And again, I can't say enough about the framework for access and belonging and what that can mean to a team in identifying what they might not have considered as far as supports to a student during the school day. So framework for access and belonging, it's a great tool and ensures not only, our kids included, sorry, the dog's going crazy, but that access and belonging and feeling of belonging. And that's what we want for our kids. How does a parent ensure that an IEP meeting is being adhered to? Besides waiting for a 6-month mark, there's really no 6-month mark. If the school's only giving report cards 2 times a year, and you need progress monitoring sooner than that, you can definitely ask for it and have it put in the IEP. But I would look at, to make sure that things are being followed and implemented from the IEP, I'd look at those progress reports. How's the student doing? If they're not doing as well as you think they should be, maybe things aren't being done that's in the IEP. Good communication is important. Be sure to, if you need to, include a communication book in the IEP, or include, weekly check-in with the teacher that you're going to talk to them. And even, again, we talked about asking those how questions, but asking kind of leading questions of the school when you have that communication time with the teacher. Tell me how they're doing in science, and limiting it or opening it up, not limiting it to yes or no questions, but tell me how's he getting along with other students in the classroom. Make it open-ended so you can tell if things are happening that are in the IEP, or if you need to add something to the IEP. I just realized I'm still sharing. I'm going to put this, I know you guys might have done it. Oops. Oh, wow. We have more to go. Put this link in the chat so you guys can see that. Someone here asked about a question, evaluation for an advanced child. I'm guessing that you mean gifted, and again, keep everything in writing, but I'd ask for that gifted IEP evaluation through the school. Can a student get an IEP even if the grades meet the standards or higher, but have social social deficits, autism, ADHD, anxiety, genetic disorder? We kind of touched on that. The answer is yeah, they can. I like to say it's more about reading and writing and arithmetic. Now we talk about behavior. If we're preparing kids to have a job when they leave school, what's even more important than getting a job is keeping a job. And most, a lot of students, they have the know-how and the skills to get a job, but to keep it, they have to have social skills. They have to be able to, get along with their colleagues. So those things are sometimes even more important than the academic piece. So I think I answered all the questions that are in there. There are some resources that are on the slides. Again, I'll send Sandy the slide deck so that you guys can have all those resources. And PEAL Center, we love our families. So are there any questions? I see the chat. There's a couple things going on in there. Oh, you guys were speaking my language. Placement starts with Gen Ed classroom.
I was emphasizing your great points.
Oh, good.
Cindy, can you speak to the FAB framework for